Is it a remake, or is it just a new interpretation of source material and ideas? This is a question that started coming up a lot whenever Joel and Ethan Coen released their 2010 film True Grit. Was that a remake of the John Wayne version, or was it a reinterpretation of the Charles Portis novel? Ever since that movie came out, we have had several releases that have brought up that exact same question. Now, the filmmakers will always say what their intention is, whether they're remaking something or no, we're trying to do something completely different with the source material. I don't think you can leave that up to them, because there have been many times where filmmakers intend to not remake something, and that's what they end up doing anyway. For instance, David Fincher's film The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, while he told people time and time again that that's not a remake, put it side by side to the film that was made before from that novel, and you'll see that that is more of a remake than the original film than it is a new perspective of the source material. On the other hand, look at something like Titanic. There have been countless movies about Titanic before, but it wasn't a remake of something like A Night to Remember. It actually took a completely new perspective, and that was a movie that stood on its own two legs. You can tell that something's a remake by looking at the original film and seeing if they're taking the same cinematic language and just updating it or trying to put a different spin on it, whereas they're actually readapting ideas or source material whenever they really change it up and come at it from a completely different perspective, not just with the story, but in the way that it's actually told. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that just because something's a remake means that it doesn't come with just as much merit as any other movie. Now, it's a completely different story whenever you have something like it. The original miniseries of this is propped up by a legendary performance by Tim Curry. Now, that means that while even though the story has a lot of problems, and the original version does have a lot of problems, that performance in particular is very difficult to get around whenever you're doing something that is either a remake or a reinvention.
See you in your dreams. Oh, come back anytime. Bring your friends.
To successfully pull something like that off, you would have to come at it from a completely different perspective, because that performance by Tim Curry so much defines what the original version of that was, that to do a remake would look shabby in comparison. If you've seen it, seen the posters, seen the trailers, then you do know that this movie is coming from a completely different angle. They're trying to reinvent the wheel, and they're not trying to do a remake of the 1990s version. And I am happy to say that the new version of it completely succeeds. First of all, on the side of Pennywise. This version of Pennywise is not only just as terrifying, it's just as terrifying in a completely different way. The Tim Curry version seemed like a birthday party clown, something that would terrify children. However, this new version, with Bill Skarsgård playing Pennywise, looks like a carnivalesque clown, something that would still stand out of place. But you could see, for at least the first few moments that he's on screen, that it could pass, at least in the mind of a child, as a real clown, even though it's a terrifying clown like most carnivalesque clowns are meant to be. The movements, mannerisms, even the way this Pennywise speaks has a babyish lilt to it.
Oh, well, I'm Pennywise, the dancing clown. Now we aren't strangers, are we?
I should get going now.
Without your boat?
Whereas Tim Curry's version is much more of an aggressive and overpowering type of presence. Looking at other cinematic versions of clowns, I would say that the Tim Curry version of Pennywise kind of draws on Jack Nicholson's performance as the Joker in Batman, and this version definitely seems like it draws on Heath Ledger's performance in The Dark Knight. But here's where I think the biggest sign of this not being a remake of the original It, and this being a completely new reworking of the source material, is the Losers Club. In the original version of It, the Losers Club was kind of what was holding the story back. The way that you would flashback to those characters, it kind of took away the suspense, and the story structure that they've done in this new version, splitting the movies in two, that's a big change. But also, you can tell in this new version of It, there's a much more loving approach to the childhood characters. It feels very much like an old Spielberg movie, or very much like Stranger Things, not just because one of the actors is in this version. It feels very much like you're just following these kids around, and the Losers Club part of the story is something that would be very easy to become bland and stale because of how dynamic and visually interesting this new version of Pennywise is. I think that it's that group of characters that very much makes this a movie in and of itself. The director, Andy Muschietti, is supposed to come back for the next version. Now, the movie made before this, Mama, wasn't that impressive. It was still eerie when it should have been much more full-on horror, but he's done a complete 180 with this version of It. I do hope that Cary Fukunaga, who did Beasts of No Nation in the first season of True Detective, who was supposed to be the director of this version of It, but is still credited as a screenwriter, I do really hope that he comes back, because I do think that a lot of the grit that was missing in the director's last movie, Mama, I think that Cary Fukunaga brought that in a big way to this version of It. I'm not completely sure how much is his job as a screenwriter and how much is Andy Muschietti's as the director, but I do hope that the two of them re-team for the next version of It. Regardless of what Chapter 2 is going to look like, it is a fun movie. It is a scary movie. I would recommend that you go check it out.